Welcome to TINAH Talks, where time is not a healer, but we do believe that we have the power to heal ourselves and take our own mental well-being into our own hands. This podcast is a byproduct of TINAH, the mental well-being marketplace, and a community platform at Time is Not a Healer, providing you with the best products for your self-healing journey. Hit subscribe and follow us on socials if you want more support on your mental well-being journey. We're your hosts, Sophie and Kelsey, and this episode is all about self-love and how you can learn to love yourself and accept yourself. So we thought we'd do this episode because I think it's a topic that a lot of us struggle with, but sometimes we don't even realize that we are struggling with. And we had a conversation about this the other day when we were catching up about what we're going to do podcast episodes on. And we both said that self-worth is something that, personally for me, I always thought I kind of liked myself when I was growing up. I thought I was all right. But then as I grew up and as I got older, I kind of realized that I had a lot of behaviors and patterns which suggested that I didn't. So that's what we want to talk about today, is like what that looks like, how that can present, and how that we kind of accept the love that we think we deserve, and then what life looks like when we don't love ourselves, basically. So I don't know if you want to kind of share your experience with this, and we can kind of talk back and through this.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, my experience has been very similar to yours, right? I was raised by my father. For the most part. And he was a bit of a hard ass, and he always really pushed me, the whole, you're a leader, not a follower, that kind of thing. He always instilled kind of self-discipline, leadership. And he was hard about it. And he always was very giving with positive compliments and things like that. So I did have that positive support from a parental figure. But, as life has gone on, and granted, there was a lot of trauma in the household. There's a lot of things that he didn't do that was good. So it was very conflicting messages. But like you, I thought I liked myself, and I've always been a very confident person. I do feel confident in who I am, but my behaviors in terms of setting boundaries that were necessary for myself that I didn't follow through on for various reasons, right? Maybe I didn't know that was a boundary I needed to follow through on, or my people pleasing qualities would come out because of my trauma and my background. And struggling to put myself first was really has in the past had always been really, really hard. And I think that's what the true definition of self-love is. It's not I think I'm pretty and I'm smart and all these things, which, by the way, I do think all those things about myself.
Good. As you should.
Right. As should you. But I think it's being able to set a boundary for yourself and following through on it for yourself, but also setting boundaries with other people. And I guess when I think about it, when it became really apparent to me, I'm someone who I have anxiety I deal with on a regular basis, and I've experienced some major depressive episodes in my life. And it was during the time, and for the record, I think we've talked about this. I used to work in inpatient psychiatry. I was a mental health specialist. I've had my low moments, but I've had education and training, and I was a really good fit for it, probably because of my own personal experiences. But I remember I was working a shit ton. I was trying to pay off all of my debt. And I was doing all the things that society expected of me. But on my days off, I would do one of two things. I would either anxiously clean my entire house because I felt like I needed to do something to get my life in order, or I would lay on the couch all day and watch Netflix. And there was no in between. I wasn't with my schedule, which I look back now, my schedule, I could have been working out. I could have been, doing things to take care of myself and set certain boundaries, but I just was really struggling to follow through on that. And I didn't feel like I had the space to focus on myself outside of all the other demands that were happening in my life. And I didn't know how to set those boundaries. And I think for me, that was my concrete, something's going on here that I'm not loving myself in the way that I need to be loved. I need to take care of myself. And yeah, that was just a hard, and then I ended up quitting my job and traveling the world. And in that experience is where I removed myself from a lot of the demands of life, right? Like I paid off my debt. I had the big girl job, but I quit that. My dad unfortunately had passed, and things were still tumultuous with my mother, but it just was what it was. But I didn't have to take care of anyone immediately in the immediate vicinity. And so I went to go travel and like learn about myself and who I was and what I liked and what I didn't like and what I wanted to say no to and what I wanted to say yes to. And that was my, I guess, self-discovery of like learning how to better love myself, which I know not everybody can do, but that's what my path was.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It's like, yeah, you just, it sometimes takes a long time to recognize that like your patterns and your behaviors are actually signs of something else. And I think I didn't really recognize that until I was told. And it was by my therapist. And we were talking about, I can't even remember really what we were talking about exactly. Like, she used to always ask me, particularly because obviously we both travel, like we both have been nomads at some point or another. I still travel and work along the way. And my therapist used to always ask me, what are you running away from? And I'd be like, I'm not running away from anything. Like, I have nothing to run away from. Like, I don't have like a terrible life back in the UK. It's just that I know that that's not the right environment for me. But when we then delve into that in a little bit more, it's like, well, do you actually like yourself? Like, do you actually like who you are? And I was like, well, yeah, like I do. Like, I think I've always been really like, particularly in my adult life, I know that I've been really good at my jobs. I know that like I've always had like enough attention from people. I know that I've built relationships with people. Like, I've never felt like I don't like myself. But then when she's asking me these questions and we're delving into my like relationship patterns, for example, she's like, well, look at the people that you're attracting into your life. Look at how you're feeling, the way that people are treating you. And then we start looking at people pleasing behaviors. We start looking at the fact that I like taking care of other people's emotional well-being and like take on responsibility for other people, and start looking at all of these other things. And then overworking, for example, like I suffered back in 2021. I had 3 burnouts in 1 year. Like, it's like I'm trying to over deliver to obviously compensate for something that's not there within myself. Or I'm looking for example, like with the people pleasing or the supporting other people's emotional needs. That's me trying to compensate for the fact that maybe like I can't do that for myself, so I'm trying to do it for somebody else. And I've always been someone, I think we spoke about this in our episode about fight or flight, like I've always been someone that's like 0 or 100, and I really struggled to find that balance in between. And I think a lot of that was down to like not loving myself or not looking after myself. Like I really didn't look after myself for a long chunk of my life. Like, I wasn't eating properly. I was addicted to sugar. I did work out, but it was sometimes quite inconsistent, or I would get obsessed. Like, it would be like an obsession rather than like a healthy habit. And I overworked. I like over delivered in my relationships. And like, I just wasn't getting that back. And that's obviously a reflection of like how I was feeling about myself. And it's only been, I would say, the past year, maybe even less than a year actually, that I've really understood what self-love means and how to set those boundaries, how to eliminate people from your life that aren't actually giving you what you need as a person, or they're a reflection of your own issues, for example. And then they're like just mirroring what you need to know about yourself, and like setting boundaries, particularly with people, is so hard, because imagine you've had friends in your life 20 years and you suddenly see them in a different light because you started to like yourself better, and actually the way that they were treating you before wasn't really acceptable, but you took it because that's all you knew, that's how you felt about yourself, so you accepted that behavior. And that's what happens obviously a lot in relationships as well, and I've definitely experienced that in relationships. So yeah, it was a massive eye-opening moment at some like certain points this year, and then as soon as you see it, you can't unsee it, and then it's like wow, I need to make some serious changes and cuts out of my life.
Yeah, I mean, you're like just hitting home the fact that like we accept the love we think we deserve, whether that is conscious or subconscious, right? And I
Yeah.
was just talking to someone the other day. I've literally talked to two different people about talking about in relationships the things that, and this is why a lot of people struggle in relationships. Like if you haven't dealt with your own stuff, and I'm not saying you have to 100% be a healed person to be in a relationship, but you have to be in a place where you're strong enough to love yourself in that situation and to like express and communicate what you need during that kind of intimate relationship and to set boundaries. Because when you don't, when you and because a relationship is going to bring up, it's a mirror, like you said, it's going to bring up everything that you've internally been working on, old like past experiences and narratives. And so the stuff you get irritated with in a partner is just a reflection of the things that you need to work on in some way. I'm not saying like you have to fix that behavior yourself, but it's bringing up some old narrative that you are holding on to, that you have some sort of like preconceived notion about based on past experiences, right? Like all of that. And so self-love is a thing that can save us from ourselves and also help us have stronger relationships with other people. We just have to kind of get past that initial difficulty of telling people no. And this is something that I think a lot of people don't realize. When you start stepping into your own and like recognizing I like myself, I love myself, and therefore I owe it to myself to do X, Y, and Z, right? To follow these boundaries. We start doing that with people we've had relationships with for years, and they don't like it because it's totally different. It's not the way that it, the way that it used to be. And then that's where you see a lot of people they get a lot of pushback from like specifically family. You can have it with friends too, but like, your parents, your siblings, they've known you as, Sophie in a particular context for a really long time. And then you start to change that up and you want to set better boundaries and have a different type of relationship with them. And it can be really difficult if people are not prepared for that, or if they're not open to that or working on that. And that's the part that makes self-love feel shitty.
Yeah, 100% can relate to that. Like that's definitely happened to me in the past 6 months or so, I'd say, like with a couple of different relationships in my life that I've had for a long time. And I just started to feel like they just weren't meeting me where I was at right now, because I did love myself at this point and I was setting the boundaries and I was able to step into my worth and say no and all of that. And actually they didn't seem to like it very much, because it's definitely caused like distance in our relationships, and in some cases I've actually even like confronted somebody and then we've full on fallen out. So it's like, okay, well, if you can't, if you're not willing to accept me as I am right now, then this isn't going to go anymore. And I'm fully comfortable with that. I don't have any like I'm not dwelling on the past. I'm not thinking because was friends with someone for 20 years or 10 years, whatever, that I now can't be I have to stay friends with them just because of the history. Obviously, right. It's sad, but at the same time, I'm different now. Like I've got a different mindset on things. And if you're not there at the same time as me, we've just grown in different directions. And that happens with all relationships, friendships, family, all sorts of different relationships. And I think people get really stuck sometimes because they think, oh, I need to maintain that because we were once this close. But no, unfortunately, that's not how life works. But it's interesting from more of like a sciencey background then, like what's actually happening to us when we aren't loving ourselves? Like what's happening in our brains?
I mean, like, right, we can know that we need to love ourselves more and we can try to work on it, but sometimes it's really hard. I mean, obviously we have the pushback from our family and friends around us when we start acting differently. But in terms of like what's happening in our brain from, from my studies and things, I think it comes down to like our evolution of how we were as human beings way, way, way back when. So our prefrontal cortex is responsible basically for a lot of different things, executive functioning, decision-making, all this. But it's one of the areas of the brain that is meant to help protect us. And so there's this thing in psychology called, I believe it's negativity bias. And it's where basically our brain for survival is always scanning our environment, looking for things that are potentially a danger. And so we're constantly assuming like, ooh, is that a risk? Ooh, is that dangerous? I shouldn't do that because of X, Y, and Z, because basically our brain is trying to keep us alive. It's like, that doesn't look safe. Let's not do that. And that can seep into the way that we think about a lot of other things. And so if we turn that internally towards ourselves, that negativity bias can look at, when you're assessing your own thoughts, your own behaviors, and your own feelings, we tend to maybe be like, oh, well, I shouldn't have done that. And I made a mistake and I fucked up the whole party and now no one wants to talk to me, right? Like we tend to go more in the negative, out of that like pure survival kind of instinct, rather than immediately going to the positive of like, no, I did a good job and I tried my best and X, Y, and Z kind of deal. But so I think it really comes down to that negativity bias that our brain really like, it's meant to be a good thing on a specific scale, but right, the way that we live now, depending where you are in the world, like for example, in the US, like I'm not experiencing any immediate dangerous situations on a regular basis. And so my brain's still scanning the environment. It's still looking for things like, well, why am I not happy? Or why does this not feel good? Or right, it's still assessing everything around me. And if you don't actively work on it, then you will easily go towards that negative bias rather than thinking about positive things and kind of cultivating, I guess if you want to put it in short terms, like that growth mindset, rather than thinking about the fixed mindset, well, I fucked up and I did this, versus, well, no, like I made a mistake, but I accomplished A, B, and C, and I can take what I've learned in the situation and grow forward. But you have, that's, people don't realize that's a skill you actually have to practice. And that's what part of self-love, active self-love is.
Yeah, I've got a really good example of that actually, like where before I started like traveling full time, I was living in London and I ran an event. I hosted a networking event off the back of lockdown with loads of small product business owners, because that's obviously my background. And we had such a successful event. Like it was amazing, like so great. Like I ran it with one of my other colleagues, and we had so much great feedback. It was such a good time, and everyone had a great time, and like loads of really great strong relationships were formed off the back of that. And at the end of the night, the first thing I did, rather than congratulate ourselves on how amazing the event had gone, I wrote myself an email with all the things that had gone wrong. And I was like, if I was to do this differently next time, this is what I would do. And for like, without even recognizing that any of the positive things that had happened or like how great the event actually was, I literally just went straight into the negative because I just couldn't accept that something good had happened that I had created. Yeah. And that sucks. Like I felt so sad for about 3 days after. I should have been on a massive high, but I felt so down about it because I was like, well, we could have done this and we could have done that. And oh my God, we didn't do this. And it was like, what the hell are you doing right now? Like, this is so sad. Like, because and then now I look back at it, I can obviously appreciate like that was a really, that was just because I didn't have the self-worth there. I didn't have the self-love there. But yeah, it was, I can totally see we're in this negative bias sometimes.
Yeah. And I think like when you're experiencing high emotions, right? Like in that moment, that's excitement, but sometimes excitement and anxiety can be confused, right? Because they're kind of the same, they're the same feeling in the body. And like if you're experiencing heightened emotions, whether it's fear, excitement, anxiety, if we don't allow, like we can sometimes take that and out of response to that emotion, that heightens that negative bias response, right? And I just, for the record, for anybody listening, I want to say that it's good to reflect on things like how can we grow? How can we do better? But first and foremost, we should also acknowledge the shit that we've done well. Like, cool, what did I accomplish? What was something, well, a small win, a big win? Like, how did this go well? And then after the fact, being like, okay, so if I want to do better with this next time, or if I would like to improve this next time, right? The way we speak about things holds a lot of weight, right? I would like to improve this in these ways next time, but that's after you've already acknowledged the awesome shit that you did. And I think that's important just for people to differentiate that, like, it's not like there's nothing wrong with reflecting and saying what you want to improve on, but it's like, in the manner in which you did it and like not acknowledging certain things. And so I'm glad you've come a long way from baby Sophie.
I know, right? Me too. But I guess we could talk about this story for hours, but let's kind of
Yeah.
summarize what we've spoken about so far. Like in terms of how can we, like, what would the actionable steps be if someone's listening to this and really resonating with what we're talking about, like that they can recognize that they are in this negative bias, or they are possibly seeing patterns in their relationships that aren't very or their people pleasing behaviors are coming out or something like that? What would you say are the things that they need to do to take action to start loving themselves a bit more?
Yeah. So like, how can we learn to like love ourselves basically a little bit more? Well, I think like you kind of touched on a point there. The very first thing is you need to get aware. You need to be aware of what is actually happening internally for yourself and how is that coming out in the world around you, right? So what are your thoughts? What are the regular common, like regularly occurring thoughts that you're having about yourself? And like, how are you feeling about yourself? So there's two separate things in case you don't know. Like thoughts are definitely separate from feelings. Our thoughts are simply that. They're just thoughts. They're not always based in reality. Our feelings are very, very real, but the way we choose to interpret them and then take action from them is something that we have control over. And then what sort of behaviors follow that, right? Like, and that's where, are you doing a lot of people pleasing where you're putting other people first and never yourself? Are you doing things to actually take care of you because you want to, you know, you're a complicated houseplant, right? You need to be watered. You need to get some sunlight. You need to do all these things to grow and feel good. And like, so are you doing those things for yourself? And so I think it really comes down to, first and foremost, the self-awareness, and then those three aspects between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, you need to work on that, right? You need to practice actively a different narrative, or a more, I hate to say like a more positive narrative. So I don't want to come on here and be like, positivity, you need to be positive, positive, positive. Like I don't want to do like that false positivity. But when you start to recognize that you have a narrative that is holding you back from showing up in the best possible way for yourself, you do need to break that down and look at it and say, okay, well, what have I learned from this experience, from this old narrative that I'm holding? What can I take away from it? How do I want to carry it moving forward in my life in a more supportive and encouraging way, right? And then how can I just be a little more kind to myself? How can I show up with a little more grace when I do fuck up? Like that's what I'm talking about in terms of like positive thinking. And so looking at your thoughts in that way, and then also write your feelings, being able to acknowledge, all right, I'm feeling this, and being kind to yourself when you're feeling big emotions, because I think most of us around the world, we're not taught how to really feel our feelings and then process them and then let them go or express them. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that process. And then how are you following through in all of this in your behavior, right? Like, are you showing up and making sure you're getting your sleep, that you're nourishing yourself with food and water, that you are doing something, kind for yourself? And this is where like self-care comes in when you think of bubble baths, but it could be bubble baths or exercise or saying no to certain things because you know that it's not good for you, in your relationships or just in behaviors and actions. But I would say that's kind of the first, like those are the three top things that you want to focus on in terms of learning how to love yourself, after first becoming aware of like, oh, this is the shit that's going on.
Yeah, 100%. It all makes sense. But I think, like I said, we could talk about this for hours. And I think we will do another episode on this. So if we summarize it there, that, self-acceptance is the first step. And then moving on to recognizing all of the behaviors and how to make those changes, and just incorporating a little bit more self-care as well. So they're really good to summarize those as well in the show notes. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, if you want, we can talk about real quick, because I know we do have to wrap up, but like, if we were to say TINAH's top tips for loving yourself, more than anyone else, right? Some really practical applications of the three things that I just said. One, for like self-awareness, meditation is really great for that. Why? Because you have to sit there and let your thoughts pass, but it helps you start to practice paying attention to what you're thinking and trying to let them go in the moment. So meditation is really great for practicing that self-awareness. And then when we're talking about really working on changing those narratives, there's a thing called cognitive reframing that you can do as like a journal exercise. There's lots of stuff all over the internet for journaling, but specifically looking up cognitive reframing and how to do it. Super, super helpful. You can do that now and again when you find yourself stuck in a certain pattern of thinking. In terms of like really adjusting one, like how we're perceiving the world rather than going to the negative bias, but a more positive bias, and then allowing ourselves to understand our feelings that come with that. Gratitude practice, super, super easy. And it's not just, I'm grateful for this thing in my life. It's about being really specific to your day. Like, I'm really grateful, something, it can be very small, and attaching feelings to it. Like, because that really solidifies the association. And then the behavior stuff, if you want to start with that in terms of behavior, self-care is the place to start. Are you giving yourself a nice cup of tea before bed? Are you, making sure you're doing the basics in terms of sleeping, eating, bathing, and then going beyond if you need, bubble baths or Epsom baths or things like that, or moving your body, stretching every day, and like just taking a little extra tender care for that. I'd say like those are the like concrete applications of kind of what we just kind of covered.
Yeah, I agree. I think, like I said, we can delve into them in so much more detail. So we will in another episode, but we both have other things to get to this morning. So we'll probably wrap it up there.
Yeah, but we can come back and maybe talk about a little bit about like what you do and what I do, because I know it's different for everybody. But yeah, I'm glad that we got to talk about this topic a little bit in depth today.
Definitely.
All right. Well, so we just want to say thanks to everyone for listening to our episode today. If this resonated with you, be sure to give us a like, and we'd love to hear your feedback in the comments about what topics you'd like to hear more about. Don't forget to subscribe, follow us on socials, and join the community at timeisnotahealer.com. And all the details can be found in the episode description below. And remember, you hold the power to heal. Until next time, you've got this.